The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So yesterday I told you about Hurricane Harvey. I told you about Hurricane Irma approaching, and I said that any opportunity to talk about climate change is a good opportunity to talk about climate change. Before hurricanes, during hurricanes, after hurricanes, always a good time to do it. By the way, we've also learned that behind Hurricane Irma is Hurricane Jose. And Donald Trump, upon hearing that Hurricane Jose was bearing down on the U.S., I thought to myself, Trump's going to try to build a wall to keep Jose out and then try to deport him if he does eventually make landfall. Bad joke. Pat's not liking that one. So anyway, yesterday, hurricanes, climate change. Today, hurricanes and emergency and disaster relief money. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It's part of Homeland Security. It's there specifically to coordinate disaster response. They're almost out of money as a result, in part, of Hurricane Harvey. FEMA is expected to have no money left by Friday, okay? Irma is expected to be stronger than all 2017 storms so far combined. And as of yesterday morning, FEMA had $1.01 billion left. This is not a lot for them. And of that, only about half, about $500 million, is actually immediately available for hurricane response. To give you a sense of how quickly a disaster will go through money, there were over $2 billion in the coffers of FEMA last Thursday. Okay, and it is now Wednesday. President Donald Trump's administration has asked Congress for an injection of almost $8 billion in additional funds. The House is voting today, may have already voted by the time you watch or listen to this program, on additional funding for Harvey. The Senate, which is expected to act this week as well, is considering whether to add a suspension of the federal debt limit to the measure. And of course, as you know, these increases to the debt limit are so politicized and so controversial in Washington, D.C., that is tying up a lot of the time, particularly this morning, getting my daily dose of cable news. And you had both Republicans and Democrats talking about the debt ceiling, which is being connected with Hurricane Harvey and other hurricane relief efforts and funding, and it always becomes a huge mess. Puerto Rico, by the way, is going to be hit first by Hurricane Irma. They have almost like no money at all. And it's sort of odd that we don't treat Puerto Rico the same way that we treat other states, right? Regardless of Puerto Rico's official designation. Oh, you're not technically a state. You're still a U.S. territory full of American citizens, but good luck with that hurricane. And in case you didn't know, Harvey and Irma aren't even the only disasters that we're dealing with. You were looking at pictures earlier, Pat, of the major fires that are happening, not only in California, but in Washington State and Oregon and Idaho. Ash is falling like snow out there. But we should just rely on the charity of private citizens. Why aren't people doing more bake sales, Pat, to fund the disaster relief effort?
Right. I think the conservatives are going to look at this and say, well, they should have planned more accordingly, right? Yeah. Because it's a government agency. Of course, they're going to run out of money. They should have taken steps to make sure that didn't happen. But the problem is these things are hard to predict. And because of climate change, they're becoming more frequent as an event. And really, this is one of the functions of the government that we have to fund. I mean, what's the alternative to that? No bake sale is going to cut it.
No, bake sales aren't going to cut it. GoFundMe campaigns aren't going to cut it. And you're sort of right. And at the same time, we do see a double standard with many Republicans, Pat, where they say, oh, whoa, well, we can't afford this for Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, rather, up in the Northeast. But as soon as there's flooding in Missouri, or there's flooding and a hurricane in Texas, or whatever the case may be, all of a sudden then Ted Cruz is out there explaining why it's different now. FEMA lacking money for a single hurricane should be disturbing to all of us. What I'm more disturbed by is the cognitive dissonance that exists, number one, when it comes to when it's okay to raise the debt ceiling or call for special session or whatever the case may be to requisition funds for these disasters based on where they're located. But also, you can't really say we can't talk about climate change, but we can talk about preparedness, because preparedness relates directly to what it is you need to prepare for. And that's connected to climate change. And I'm at the point of saying it's immoral and it borders on criminal to pretend like climate change doesn't have anything to do with FEMA and natural disasters, et cetera. And the right will always say, you can't tie any one event to climate change or to fossil fuel procurement or drilling or whatever the case may be. That may well be true, but that doesn't mean that there are not connections, complicated connections, as we talked about yesterday. Hillary Clinton has a memoir coming out soon. It's called What Happened. It includes quite a bit of material about the 2016 election, hence the title, What Happened. We have excerpts, and to me, the simultaneously funniest and saddest and most frustrating parts of it are some of what Hillary Clinton believes happened in 2016. Let's put up a screenshot here where Hillary Clinton writes, throughout the primaries, every time I wanted to hit back against Bernie's attacks, I was told to restrain myself, noting that his plans didn't add up, that they would inevitably mean raising taxes on middle-class families, or that they were little more than a pipe dream. All of this could be used to reinforce his argument that I wasn't a true progressive. My team kept reminding me that we didn't want to alienate Bernie supporters. President Obama urged me to grit my teeth and lay off Bernie as much as I could. I felt like I was in a straitjacket. This is like full victim mode, blame everybody mode except for herself. Consider, she's blaming her team for telling her to restrain herself, Bernie for overpromising things, according to her, Bernie supporters sort of as being part of that idea that they would incorrectly identify Hillary Clinton as not progressive if she criticized Bernie's plans. If you can't figure out how to navigate, like forget the victim, the victim and blaming everybody stuff for a second. If you can't figure out how to successfully navigate those hurdles in a primary, have you really earned the presidency?
Then you don't deserve to win. And I mean, you look at Hillary Clinton, she had every single advantage on her side. She had the mainstream media in support of her. She had the Democratic Party behind her from the beginning, coronated her as the candidate from the get-go.
DNC.
I mean, there was just a number of examples. She had name recognition. She had been through the process before with her own campaigns, with her husband's campaigns. I mean, it was her fault for losing.
But Pat, if it wasn't for her staff, as well as Bernie supporters and Bernie doing things that were restraining or constraining her, then she wouldn't have had a problem.
It was almost like Bernie Sanders was trying to win the presidency himself.
It's crazy. It's almost like, yeah, Bernie was doing what he thought would help him win. Here's another quote, okay, from Hillary Clinton's upcoming book, and it just gets even crazier. When I finally challenged Bernie during a debate to name a single time I changed a position or a vote because of a financial contribution, he couldn't come up with anything. Nonetheless, his attacks caused lasting damage, making it harder to unify progressives in the general election and paving the way for Trump's crooked Hillary campaign. Do you understand what she's saying? She's saying Bernie's attacks against her during the primary ultimately made her lose to Donald Trump. Now, it's true, 12% of Bernie primary supporters voted for Trump, and every single one of them I would like to talk to and figure out what the hell they were thinking. And mathematically, you can look at that and say, well, look at how close some of these states were. It could have actually flipped it to Hillary Clinton. That's different, and we could make that argument with Jill Stein in some states. That is a different argument than saying the sole reason that in the grand scheme of her entire campaign and Bernie's entire campaign and the eventual primary, rather national campaign between Hillary Clinton and Trump, the fact that Bernie criticized her during the primary is why she ultimately lost to Donald Trump?
And there was a number of topics where Bernie Sanders would lay off of her. Like, he had the golden opportunity to go after her emails, and he said he doesn't give a damn about her damn emails.
The sort of lack of depth and nuance in these analyses that I've read from Hillary Clinton's upcoming book when it comes to Bernie's big promises, the big picture she's missing is that Bernie's appeal wasn't limited to or even mostly because of his specific policy proposals, which, by the way, in some areas differed from Hillary Clinton's proposals. In other areas overlapped quite a bit with Hillary Clinton's proposals, not nearly in all areas. Bernie's approach is what was mostly different. It didn't come off as calculated in the way that Hillary Clinton's approach did. Bernie was willing to speak way more toughly about Republicans early on. He was much more willing to criticize the system at large in a real and sort of genuine seeming way as more than just there are symptoms that Hillary Clinton pointed to about our system that aren't so good. The reality is, if it were all policy that was the result of how the primary and eventually the national election took place, Bernie would not have done as well as he did. I was one of the first people to say, particularly on foreign policy, Bernie's not really as fleshed out as Hillary Clinton is. Remember when he was asked something about Russia or Putin, I believe, during one of the debates, he seemed stunned, like he had just been sucker punched, right? I mean, that he really lacked some preparedness on those issues. The point is, you felt like Bernie genuinely supported his proposals and believed in them, whereas Hillary Clinton thought a lot of her proposals were good politics and would poll well, but would do something totally different if it's what voters preferred.
And this was a 500-page book that Hillary Clinton just released. I really wonder if there's any self-reflection in there. And she doesn't even have to go into the specifics of maybe people thought she was too closely tied to Wall Street or the big banks, but maybe just, an understanding of why people thought she was dishonest or just didn't like her at a visceral level.
I think she misses it. I think she just doesn't get it. She still doesn't get that the Bernie candidacy was not what she thinks it was. She doesn't get that Bernie's ideas weren't reactive, right? Bernie, even without the fully formed foreign policy ideas that I've criticized Bernie Sanders for, his proposals were always part of the broader politics that he's been doing for decades, not forced, not concocted to appeal specifically in November of 2016 to voters. So I think Hillary Clinton is way off the mark here. Assuming that the book is her honest thoughts, it's also possible that she's written the book in this way, continuing to politically posture for one reason or another. I look forward to reading it, not because I think it's going to be a great read, but because I really want to understand the full misunderstanding that Hillary Clinton might have about what the hell happened back in November.
It's obviously an opportunity for her to make money, but some people are looking at this as a way to set herself up from another run, maybe to go again for 2020. I think she'll get defeated again.
I don't
maybe
think,
even in the Democratic primary.
I don't think it's a good idea, and I hope that's not what it is. But yeah, I've been getting some tweets about that. I'm on Twitter at @DPacman. Send me your thoughts. We'll be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Casey Hamlet. Casey, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. This is viewer and listener supported media. I appreciate the closing in on 2,000 of you that have made a Patreon pledge at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Launching tomorrow, the bonus show and the full show available for patrons. And of course, membership, the coupon code is IVoted17. You can sign up and get instant access at 40% off at davidpakman.com/membership. We have a lot to catch up on today, not the least of which is Hatriot Mail. Quick reminder, here's what Hatriot Mail is.
If Ayn Rand and Ronald Reagan had a baby and suckled that child off the teat of liberty, its cries would sound a little something like Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
Okay, this week's Hatriot Mail, it quite literally has no introduction because I'm not going to give it one. Here it is.
Agenda, agenda, agenda. You're a f***ing cuck. Go away. Globalist criminal empire propaganda. Go away, Pakman. This Pakman kid is a snowflake. Thinking he can is question of the integrity of this gentleman of who has the experience as he does in the field. This guy is a stooge. The faggot ape Muslim failed and you demon rats will not win a presidential election for at least 50 years because of this Umbumba traitor.
This is what I call Hatriot bingo, right? I mean, it basically had, the only thing it was missing was a misspelling of your. Right. That's the only thing it was missing from typical Hatriot bingo.
Do you like being called a kid in this scenario?
I don't mind.
Pakman kid?
I don't mind. Okay. Yeah, people don't realize I'm in my early 30s, but yeah, that's it. I have a feeling I'm going to like that more and more as the years go. Use Hatriot Mail to do something positive for independent media. The coupon code Hatriot40 is available to you at davidpakman.com/membership. Okay, I'm excited, Pat. I'm very excited. Last week, we announced a membership contest sponsored by Patrick Ferreira. And the idea was it is an audio-visual contest. We've had membership giveaways in the past where the applicants or participants, I guess is the right way to refer to them, had to write something, a progressive patriotic letter, for example, or it was open to college students who had to write in a short essay about what the David Pakman Show means to them. Whatever.
I liked the GR-inspired Incoherent Rant contest.
Incoherent Rant contest sponsored by GR. Whatever. This time, Patrick Ferreira wanted an Instagram-based audio-visual contest where there were 5 memberships available for people who created some kind of audio-visual material related in some way to the show. And I am ready to present the 5 winners to you, okay? First and foremost is this one that you're seeing here, which we'll put up full screen for you. This is a caricature of me done by Haven Herrera. And I have to tell you, this is a pretty good caricature. I've had other caricatures done that they just don't really look like me. This one does the nose shape perfectly, what's known as the Triceratops nose in some circles of my family. The eyebrows are pretty solid. The eyes, a little too close together, are pretty good. The sort of hairstyle is good. I think my chin is not nearly this big, but that's okay. This is a really good caricature. Really good.
I like the colors. I like the Boston skyline in the background.
Oh, that's right. That's the Prudential Center in the background.
Some nice subtleties there.
I only just noticed that that's the Prudential. And in the lower left, you actually see the Zakin Bridge.
You do.
I did not even notice that. So this is excellent. Haven, you've got a year David Pakman Show membership for free, courtesy of Patrick Ferreira. Next, this is Instagrammer C Topkiss. C Topkiss. You speculated, Pat, that if there were any cartoonifications done of you, they would be unflattering.
Right.
And C. Topkiss did what he considers a very flattering caricaturization of you. I have to tell you, this is pretty good.
I think it's flattering as well. I'm happy about it. And what I love is that this came from the announcement video from this contest.
Right.
And I was pointing to the caricature of you in the background, and little did I know at that time that that would become a caricature of me.
Yeah, it's Inception-like, no doubt about it. C. Topkiss, congratulations. You've earned a year David Pakman Show membership. Next is a video. This is from Instagrammer Brian V. Connor. Brian V. Connor did a little remix of What If I Wasn't Jewish? Take a look at this. This is what would be different if I weren't Jewish. What's so horrible about being a Nazi? Short and sweet. Short and sweet. Of course, those, if you were listening, were 2 completely unrelated videos. In the second one, I'm actually quoting someone else.
That must have taken a lot of work, though. I mean, those are old videos.
To track down those videos, yeah. So very clever. Brian V. Connor, you have won a membership. Next is Elliot B. 776. This is a really funny mashup of Kyle Kulinski from Secular Talk with the face has been photoshopped to be my face, even though it's Kyle Kulinski's body, Kyle Kulinski's studio, Kyle Kulinski's attire. And Pat is also on one of Kyle Kulinski's screens. And then it says, yeet, zip, zip, zippity, which I think is something Kyle says, right?
Is that a Kyleism?
I think he does, and he kind of like holds his blazer the way that he's doing in this image. So very, very clever, putting my face on Kyle Kulinski's body. That is the 4th winner of the free membership. And lastly, Aton Grad, that's the username, has done a drawing, which is a complete mashup of a million different references from the show. You've got our logo. It's a map of Texas where former producer Lewis used to live. It's a map of New England. It has a calendar which says the date is August 17th, 2005. The date of the first, was it 17th or 23rd? Anyway, August of 2005 when the show started. There is a Boston College flag. I am, of course, teaching at Boston College. There is a little poster that is Visit Tel Aviv, which I did. There's a David Pakman Show coffee mug, an Argentina flag. There's a Keurig, referencing, of course, Pat's Keurig scandals of the last year. And there's some other items that I don't totally know the references to. I think it's a paint bucket and a piece of cake and some other stuff.
Scale there. Some of these references
the scales of justice, yeah. Really, really good. Okay, so Aton, also a good one. 5 winners, free memberships. Get in touch. We need you to get in touch because since this was through Instagram, I actually don't have people's email addresses to set up your free memberships. Okay, yesterday we talked about Donald Trump rescinding DACA. And it was so funny. Yesterday I was teaching the class that I teach as adjunct faculty at Boston College, and we were evaluating the strength of arguments. And we had a hypothetical argument which said, Since Donald Trump wants to get rid of DACA, he doesn't care about the future of immigrant children. And of course, that's not a really strong argument. It's possible that Donald Trump doesn't realize that scrapping DACA would hurt immigrant children. This was a hypothetical that we talked about in class. And yet, according to a new report, it appears Donald Trump truly didn't realize what would happen if he rescinded DACA, which he said he would yesterday. According to the New York Times, as this entire thing was developing, Trump administration officials were worried that Donald Trump didn't realize what would happen if he rescinded DACA. To put it another way, Donald Trump made a major decision about policy without understanding what it meant or the implications. Here's a quote from the New York Times yesterday. The blame-averse president told a confidant over the past few days that he realized that he had gotten himself into a politically untenable position. As late as 1 hour before the decision was to be announced, administration officials privately expressed concern that Mr. Trump might not fully grasp the details of the steps he was about to take, and when he discovered their full impact would change his mind, according to a person familiar with their thinking who was not authorized to comment on it and spoke on the condition of anonymity. But ultimately, the president followed through on his campaign pledge at the urging of Jeff Sessions and other hardline members in his White House, including Stephen Miller, his top domestic advisor. Is anyone shocked? And some people say he's been talking about DACA since the campaign, so clearly he understands it. Trump's been talking about health care since the beginning of his campaign. We found out a couple months ago he didn't seem to know the difference between life insurance and health insurance. This is not at all shocking if true, that Trump had no idea what would happen if he rescinded DACA.
You know, yesterday we were wondering why Jeff Sessions went out there to make the announcement, and the White House press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, said that it was because of a legal matter, and they didn't really think it was constitutional, so that's why they sent Sessions out there.
Oh, yeah.
We were thinking maybe it was just Trump being cowardly and wanted Sessions to be thrown under the bus to take the political hit.
Yeah.
But now it just seems as if Trump just didn't know what he was talking about, and even though, you know, you'd be reading off a piece of paper or a teleprompter, he couldn't even BS his way through that.
He also might have not thought of it as a big enough deal to go out there himself. He's like, nah, we're just rescinding DACA. I mean, this doesn't really change anything for anybody, so we'll just send Jeff Sessions out there. It's also funny from that quote that there were advisors who were thinking, if we can get Trump to understand this, then he'll change his mind. That is not how Donald Trump makes decisions. Any advisor who still thinks if we just explain it better to Donald Trump, then he'll change his mind, you've not been paying attention for the last 7+ months of Donald Trump's administration. Silver lining, it appears Trump didn't go with the last piece of advice someone whispered into his ear. That's the only silver lining I can possibly find. It seems like he's stuck with something despite the most recent influence attempts that he might have received from his advisors. If you were brought to the U.S. as a kid, it's wrong to deport you since you did nothing wrong. You were brought by your parents. That's the big picture. Sometimes to understand an issue, you've got to go into the details. Sometimes to understand an issue, you've got to go to the big picture. Here, it's the big picture, and this is an absolute and total disaster.
Just knowing the mindset of Stephen Miller and Jeff Sessions, it's no surprise that they would be pushing for something like this. Of course. And that's why it's unfortunate that Donald Trump is so easily convinced by these people. You know, in a leadership position, you have to be able to listen to a bunch of different perspectives and choose the best one.
Yes.
Not just whoever's the last in the room.
I think President Obama, for all of his faults, he was able to do that, which is to soberly take advice from dissenting individuals in some cases and formulate on his own what really makes sense.
You can't delegate out every responsibility. You have to know the policy by yourself.
That's right. DavidPakman.com/Reddit. Discuss this and any other issues from today's show with us.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Socialism has never worked. It's become a truism repeated by right-wingers and people who just don't know much about political theory. It could be something someone tries to say when you tell them you voted for Bernie Sanders. Psh, Bernie Sanders. Don't you know that socialism has never worked? Many don't know much about the history of socialism or even really understand what socialism actually is. They hear the word socialism and they think of authoritarian regimes like the Soviet Union or North Korea, or even worse, they might say, hey, socialism doesn't work when they're having a conversation about someone like Barack Obama, implying that Obama is himself a socialist. Now, it should go without saying that Obama is not a socialist, but this actually has to be explained to some people. This is true regardless of whether you are for or against socialism or communism or capitalism or social democracy. I am not a socialist, but I can only understand that if I actually know what socialism is. So let's begin there. Defined by a textbook, socialism is the collective ownership of a society's means of production. Means of production could be non-human resources used to produce things of economic value like real estate or farmland, natural resources, equipment, buildings, infrastructure, roads, and collective ownership of these things meaning workers or the public own them. Some define socialism as a system by which social equality can be achieved. In this broader way of thinking about it, socialism could mean any kind of socialistic philosophies or attitudes or tendencies, or a system that combines orthodox socialist practices with other constructs like capitalism. For instance, you could say that some Scandinavian countries are socialistic by modern standards, not because they have a system where the government or workers own everything, but because they have a system where there's a relatively greater amount of intervention by democratic government to protect socialistic ideals like egalitarianism, civil rights, equal education, environmentalism, and the prevention of abuse by actors in the free market. These are capitalist societies, and they're definitely not realizations of socialism as defined in a political science glossary, but these are manifestations of socialistic inclinations, especially when compared to what goes on in many other developed countries. Socialism is an extremely broad umbrella term to describe a wide range of political, social, and economic systems, movements, and ideas. Let's explore where socialism comes from, some of its variations, and how they functioned in society. Some elements of socialism have ancient roots. Ancient Buddhism taught that the individual and all other living beings are interconnected and interdependent, and that all humans should be treated equally and with kindness. People often draw parallels between socialism and Buddhism, and many say that Plato's Republic first articulated the notion of a socialist state, a state that aims to solve social problems by government action through higher taxes and redistribution of resources. There are lots of other aspects of Plato's Republic that don't at all align with modern socialism. Socialistic ideals are seen being portrayed in the Hebrew Bible, which in many places says that people should be treated equally and that we should be generous to the have-nots. The book of Leviticus says you shall not oppress or exploit your neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. Deuteronomy says God enacts justice for orphans and widows, and he loves immigrants, giving them food and clothing. That means you must also love immigrants because you were immigrants. Don't take advantage of poor or needy workers, whether they are fellow Israelites or immigrants who live in your land or your cities. From Ecclesiastes, it is God's gift to humankind that everyone should eat and drink. From Psalms, give justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Now, this might get awkward for anti-socialist Christian conservatives, but the New Testament is also chock full of socialist themes. Jesus advocated that all people, including governments, should provide for the poor and distribute resources according to people's needs. Some quotes from the New Testament: all who believed were together and had all things in common, and they sold their possessions and goods and divided them among all men as every man had need. And the multitude of them that believed were of one heart and of one soul. Neither said any of them that aught of the things which he possessed was his own, but they had all things in common. If you would be perfect, go, sell what you possess and give to the poor. When you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. Distribution was made unto every man according as he had need. To take another religious example, in Zoroastrianism, the prophet Mazdak the Younger in 6th century Persia promoted the implementation of social welfare institutions and collective ownership of property. Many ancient religions acknowledged the social nature of humans, whether on purpose or by accident, and promoted equality, caring for the needy, and common ownership. The term socialism itself wasn't used until the early 19th century in Western Europe by philosophers and social critics like Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Henri de Saint-Simon, and Robert Owen. At first, the word was used not to describe any one political system, but as an abstraction, a philosophy that societies could or should operate to serve the collective, as opposed to just thinking about the individual. This was in the wake of the French Revolution, and in large part a reaction to the poverty and inequality that was growing out of the Industrial Revolution. And then over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries, there were many, many different philosophies that branched out of this to form separate socialist intellectual movements. This is where the idea that socialism means any one thing is dispelled. When someone says socialism has never worked, be suspicious that they're thinking very narrowly and really not taking into account how many different types of socialism there really are and how different types of socialism have manifested, or they might just be completely clueless about history, too. Many of the flavors of socialism have some overlap and aren't necessarily mutually exclusive movements. One of the first schools of socialist thought was utopian socialism, which in itself is sort of an umbrella of different theories. But in this way of thinking, socialists have posed that capitalists, factory owners, and others would voluntarily hand over the means of production to workers. They believed that this would be accomplished by way of education and conversations between socialists and capitalists until all the means of production were controlled by the collective and decentralized democracies. Many utopian socialists drew from Christianity to form the rationales for their views. Utopian socialism has often been criticized for focusing too much on theoretical models of how the socialism might work and not enough on how it would be achieved, hence the name utopian. Then there's Marxism. Now, many people refer to Marxism colloquially as communism, even though communism can actually describe an array of different systems, some of which don't even involve a state, which I'll touch on in a second. But Marxism is definitely not merely synonymous with socialism the way many people think. Marxism is a type of socialism or a type of communism, something very specific. And it's not just an economic system, it's an entire philosophical worldview and a way of analyzing politics and society, economics, history, religion, art, whatever. And there is much, much more that can be explained about Marxism than I'm able to cover in this video, but as an ultra-simplified overview, political Marxism is centered around class struggle, revolution, and Marx's historical theory of materialism. Marxism advocates a revolution wherein a society's means of production are taken by force rather than by reform or negotiation or slower forms of transition. The means of production will then be controlled by a proletarian state, which in theory will lead to an egalitarian, stateless society that governs itself without coercive institutions. Really important point here. This is not what the Soviet Union or its, quote, communist successors achieved or were working toward, despite their pretenses. Bolshevism, Maoism, and the like are inherently right-wing, totalitarian perversions of Marxism. In direct contrast to Marxism and other forms of state socialism is libertarian socialism, where there's an emphasis on having a state that is either small and decentralized or completely non-existent. One version of libertarian socialism is anarchism, which is a set of socialist movements that generally oppose the idea of hierarchies and authority altogether, especially the state. Really, no variation or stage of anarchism involves government by definition, and almost all schools of anarchism see any type of hierarchy as either unnecessary or unethical in any kind of human interaction, a boss at the workplace, a leader in a social movement, whatever the case may be. Now, within anarchism, there is anarchist communism, which seeks to abolish not only the state, but all markets, money, and private property in exchange for communal ownership of the means of production and decentralized grassroots direct democracies. There's anarcho-syndicalism, which can be thought of as a sort of extension of anarchist communism, where the means of production are controlled by confederated trade unions called syndicates. This type of anarchism actually manifested in Catalonia, Spain, right before World War II. In this instance, socialism worked. Almost all industries and aspects of the economy were collectivized, and society functioned efficiently without capitalism or money. Catalonia was able to provide quality health care for its 2.5 million inhabitants. Under anarcho-syndicalism, Catalonia saw a growth in wealth and production and absence of poverty. More schools were built all around, objectively better public services were provided, and they had a highly effective military, which they constantly used to protect themselves against the Spanish nationalist forces during the Spanish Civil War. George Orwell described what he saw when he visited Catalonia in the 1930s. It was the first time I had ever been in a town where the working class was in the saddle. This shows you what human beings are like when they are trying to behave as human beings and not as cogs in the capitalist machine. Anarcho-syndicalist communities also exist today in Chiapas, Mexico, which first developed in the 1990s under the Zapatista movement. Today, they successfully provide adequate education and healthcare services for themselves. They have sustainable and ecologically sound agricultural practices, which provide more than enough food, and they are champions of women's rights and the rights of indigenous Mexicans. And there are many other types of socialist anarchism. By the way, socialist anarchism should be redundant because things like anarcho-capitalism present oppressive economic hierarchies of authority that are inherently non-anarchistic. But with all of the ANCAPs running around on the internet these days, it's worth just clarifying that point. Beyond anarchism, there is democratic socialism and social democracy, which seek to implement the principles of socialism in the context of a democratic and sometimes capitalist state. Principles like equality, social justice, environmentalism, civil liberties, free speech. Democratic socialism and social democracy differ from anarchism, obviously, because there is a state. They differ from Marxism because they're frequently thought of as systems that are achieved through reform as opposed to revolution, or they're thought of as vehicles for reform to something else, and they also don't carry many of the other characteristics of Marxism. Democratic socialism and social democracy are often considered more centrist than Marxism or anarchism, and according to many, are even compatible with capitalism, or at least some elements of capitalism. In other words, in democratic socialism and social democracies, you can have markets, but the state provides a great deal of regulation and social welfare. Distinctions are sometimes made between democratic socialism and social democracy, in that democratic socialist states will ensure that major factions of industry are publicly owned, while social democracies tend to exist within more capitalist frameworks. Currently, no countries in the world really fit the description of democratic socialism. Venezuela under Hugo Chavez claimed to be democratic socialist, but it was, and still is, by the way, just another right-wing, oppressive, authoritarian type of socialism. There are a handful of countries today that can be accurately described as social democracies. Modern social democracies allow egalitarianism, things like social welfare, universal health care, and representative democracy to flourish within the context of capitalism. Think of countries like Denmark, Finland, Norway, Iceland, Sweden. So modern social democracy is sometimes referred to as the Nordic model. These countries have free college, free graduate school, free or inexpensive world-class health care, paid through taxes. Compared to other developed countries, generally speaking, they have lower rates of crime and a higher quality of life. Socialism has been used to solve economic problems for millennia in a wide variety of places and in different forms. Sumeria, circa 2100 BC, had a state-planned economy. Food was directly distributed through the state. Evidence of their bureaucracies can be found written on tens of thousands of clay tablets that were excavated in modern-day Iraq. The Code of Hammurabi in Babylonia around 1750 BC fixed the wages of workers and capped how much physicians were allowed to charge their patients. In Egypt, during the Ptolemaic dynasty from 323 to 30 BC, the state controlled the means of production and every aspect of commerce. The government owned all of the land and decided what crops should be grown and where. It controlled the mines, the production of oil, salt, paper, textiles, and everything was funded through an intricate taxation system. Under Emperor Diocletian during the 3rd century BC, Rome responded to harmful monopolies and widespread poverty and unemployment by nationalizing all major industries and creating tons of public work projects. The Chinese Emperor Wu of Han in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, to combat growing monopolies and wealth inequality, established an income tax, nationalized natural resources, regulated trade, fixed prices, and established public works. The longest-lasting use of socialism is thought to be the Incan economic system between the 13th and 16th centuries. Everyone in the society collectively organized every aspect of agriculture, labor, trade, and transportation, and a census kept track of materials, individuals, and income. The Incan people graciously participated in this system in exchange for security and food, and it worked despite the massive size of the Incan territory, and it only fell apart because of the arrival of the Spanish in 1533. Responding to someone claiming that socialism has never worked, I would remind them that to the extent that socialism has been tried, where ideas and tendencies of democratic, egalitarian, left-wing socialism have been woven into political and economic life and haven't been nullified by right-wing phenomena like totalitarianism, police states, and oligarchy, the results have been good. The right-wing or conservative or classical liberal dogma in the U.S. is that higher taxes and a strong public sector are just awful. They say these things inhibit economic growth and innovation, or that the welfare state and thorough regulation of markets is unsustainable, or even that these things endanger individual liberty. As progressives, we know that's not true, or really anyone who looks at the data or has studied truly democratic applications of socialism would know that's not true. Look at Scandinavian countries today, or even countries like France, Ireland, Canada, and New Zealand, which share some of the same characteristics. No matter what lens you look at these systems through, they are the best game in town. And again, these are capitalist societies, but they borrow from socialism. In terms of economics, these countries see economic growth at higher rates, lower unemployment, higher rates of job creation, better productivity per work hour, lower poverty, less homelessness. In terms of social issues, there's greater gender equality, better education equality, more social mobility, better healthcare, better quality of life in general. Socialism doesn't necessarily mean Marxism or communism, and it doesn't have to mean abandoning things like individual rights. Entire branches of socialism are centered around individualism as their highest value. In many of its manifestations, socialism just means allowing government to more efficiently do what we already called upon it to do: protect people's rights, protect people from abuses of the free market, and provide social safety nets. And neither I nor any other reasonable person want to achieve those things through the power of one authoritarian person or small group of people. It should be done democratically through representative government or genuine communal ownership, like it's done in every place on earth where socialism has worked. Socialism combined with democratic values, which countries like the U.S. in principle hold dear, can give us something desirable in terms of preventing the working class from being exploited by the rich and corporations, preventing devastating wealth inequality, and providing basic human needs like healthcare and education. Many other societies have shown us that these things can be accomplished without anything reminiscent of the extreme examples often pointed to for people to claim that socialism doesn't work.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I've got totally surreal video to show you. We're pretty familiar with political photo ops at this point. We know about politicians showing up to hammer in one nail on a house or shovel one shovelful of dirt onto something, who knows for what. But Donald Trump has taken this to a new level. You'll remember that initially Donald Trump went to Texas during Hurricane Harvey, didn't meet with a single victim of the storm, spoke briefly, but instead of even mentioning the victims, he instead praised the crowd that had turned up. He was lambasted for this, so he went back down to Texas, and he did the strangest thing. A pickup truck shows up in Houston to receive relief supplies, right? So this is somebody who's been affected by the hurricane. And excuse me if I seem sort of confused in even explaining this, because I just can't wrap my head around what you're about to see here. Trump is handed a bucket of supplies for this guy who's in a pickup truck, and I think in the car, the man's partner, significant other, is in the passenger seat. Trump only has to carry this bucket about 10 feet. It still looks like the bucket is empty. Trump's holding it like the bucket weighs nothing. Maybe it was actually an empty bucket and this was just a staged photo op. But regardless, this is a guy with a pickup truck, mind you. Trump walks over and tries to put, and does put, the bucket through the guy's open window. Like, he puts the bucket on the lap of the driver. The guy's got a pickup truck, right? You put the supplies in the bed of the pickup truck. Trump, no, he pushes the bucket through the guy's open window and then tells the guy to have a good time. If you're in a situation where you need to go get hurricane relief supplies after historic flooding, have a good time. Here's some video.
Hey, can you handle this? It's a lot of... Yeah. Yes, sir. Have a good time. Thank you, man. You take care of yourself. Yeah. Thanks for your help, brother. Thanks. Thank you, man.
Have a good time. And did you see how he was moving that thing around like it's completely empty?
Yeah.
It's just like floating in the wind, like there's nothing in this bucket.
Well, the have a good time thing, I think that's just one of those parting words. Like, some people say, take care, have a good day.
Is that what you think?
Maybe he just didn't put too much thought behind it.
No, he doesn't. He didn't put too much thought behind it. I think you're right on there. And then someone comes over and gives Trump more stuff to put in the back. Someone finally actually directs him to put it in the back of the pickup truck. And they come over with a box and then some water. And then Trump actually put these in the back of the pickup truck. Take a look.
Right in the back. I'll put this back here for you. All right. Okay, you got it. Yes, sir. One more.
All right, putting the president to work there as he loads this truck.
There you go.
Good job. There you go. Just go ahead and put that in. You got it?
There's the water. Yeah.
Okay, fellas. You're all set. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You're all set, buddy.
Beautiful. All right. Guy, it's good exercise.
All right, good exercise, says the president, really pitching in. Athena Jones back.
Good exercise and a good time had by all at the hurricane relief effort where people are showing up for food.
I'm surprised he was willing to exercise, though, because Donald Trump thinks that human energy is like a battery, and once you deplete it, you can't recharge it.
Listen, I know this isn't ending DACA or pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords. Believe me, folks, I get that. But has anyone seen more bizarre video? This was more cringeworthy than when Paul Ryan was washing what were obviously already clean dishes in a clearly already cleaned up soup kitchen. If Trump went to get gas for a car, I mean, the guy is so out of touch. Do you think Trump would know you don't put the gasoline into the engine, like under the hood, that you don't need to pop the hood to gas up? Do you think he would even know that? He just seems so out of touch.
Maybe he'd roll down the window and put it through the window.
Yeah, that's where he seems to put it. Anything car related goes right in the window. Very strange video. And do you feel bad for Trump because he's so out of touch? This is worse than, there was a moment in the Obama campaign against Mitt Romney where Mitt Romney showed up. I don't know if it was, I think it was a supermarket, not a Costco. And he was pushing a cart around. And when he went in, he just loaded endless amounts of, I think it was seltzer water and yogurts. That's all he bought. And then every aspect of it seemed really, really forced, and it was just super awkward. That was nothing compared to the awkwardness of Trump putting a bucket of supplies in through a guy's window.
Well, at first we were criticizing Donald Trump because he went to Corpus Christi and he didn't meet with any of the victims. He didn't talk about any of the victims.
Now he did.
Do you feel as if he's redeemed himself now?
Oh, believe me, this is full redemption when it comes to independent media and the ability of being able to play funny videos. He has completely redeemed himself for sure. Very weird. I encourage you to watch the video if you're just listening. Voicemail 219-2-David-P. Here is a voicemail from someone who is not particularly thrilled with the way the show is going.
You two are homo flakes. They should stick you in the Army. Maybe you can get some transgender surgery done.
Huh.
Idiots.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that... How do you even react to that?
I thought at first he was going to say that we should be put in the Army so we can be toughened up a bit.
Oh, yeah, man up.
His joke doesn't really make sense, though, because transgenders won't be allowed in Trump's military.
Yeah, none of it makes sense. I think that's really the bottom line. None of it makes sense. On today's bonus show, Sheriff David Clark was apparently in talks for a Trump White House job when new Chief of Staff John Kelly said, yeah, not going to happen. The Zika virus is being used to treat aggressive brain cancer, and a descendant of Robert E. Lee quits his pastor position over the hurtful reaction to his appearance on MTV. All of those stories and more on the bonus show. Starting tomorrow, you can access the bonus show not only through membership, but also through Patreon. Check it out.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.